È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Con EasyBank, la banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo.
Qui è ora. Qui è dove conoscere significa confrontarsi con le sfide della contemporaneità, ascoltare le nuove generazioni da accogliere nel tempo presente. Ora, Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. Visita il sito unicat.it.
ma è una risorsa da valorizzare. Riciclare, riciclare, riciclare è l'attività principale per decarbonizzare. Riciclare, riciclare, riciclare. Montello esempio di economia circolare.
Si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Con Bank, la banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo.
Qui è ora. Qui è dove conoscere significa confrontarsi con le sfide della contemporaneità, ascoltare le nuove generazioni da accogliere nel tempo presente. Ora, Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. Visita il sito unicat.it.
Il rifiuto non è un problema, ma è una risorsa da valorizzare. Riciclare, riciclare, riciclare è l'attività principale per decarbonizzare. Riciclare, riciclare, riciclare. Montello esempio di economia circolare.
Si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Good morning and welcome to this debate promoted by the Subsidiarity group. And the title is The First Capital of the Enterprise is the Person. So this was organized in cooperation with the Parliamentary Intergroup for Subsidiarity. And we are here to learn something and not simply to repeat things we already know. And in particular, we will focus on this topic, so human capital. But first of all, I would like to introduce the speakers, very important speakers. The first one is a very welcome guest of the meeting. He comes almost every year. And we have the pleasure to have Giancarlo Giorgetti, Minister of Economy and Finance. And then, considering that we like the corporate politics mixture, we have Stefano Barrese, head of the Banca dei Territori division at Intesa Sanpaolo. And then we have three important members of the Intergroup: Elena Bonetti, member of the Italian Parliament for the political party Azione; Maurizio Lupi, the president of the Parliamentary Intergroup for Subsidiarity; and finally, Marco Osnato, president of the Sixth Finance Commission of the Deputy Chamber for Fratelli d'Italia. Right, so I'm going to ask questions because I want to start from a fact. We saw how important it was for Italy companies 4.0, capital investments, and the support of such investments, because investments lead to GDP growth. But considering statistical and economic theories that I also deal with professionally, well, since the very beginning of economic science, with a Nobel Prize in '62, Becker, the idea that investing in education leads to an improvement of production and productivity is quite important. And then News, another expert in the field, said that when the quality of education improves, then the GDP improves. There's a very interesting chart showing that the countries that show a higher GDP growth are Far East countries: China, Korea, Vietnam. So it's not just about sort of low-income production, but also educational improvement. In Italy, We always think that education ends when people are 24 or 25 years old, but, well, even the sort of obsolescence of any kind of life cycle of change. Well, now things keep changing very, very fast and very, very frequently. So, I mean, now people have to constantly update their skills and knowledge. When I got my degree, there was no personal computer, no internet, no smartphones, no statistical packages. I mean, nothing of what is available today and that improves and supports work wasn't available. So, I mean, today it's about lifelong learning at both personal and professional level. But maybe it's not that easy, because if we consider, well, the main rules that have dominated over the last few years at financial level have been oriented in a different way. So education, unfortunately, is not considered as an important asset to invest in, because it's not easy also to depreciate it. But instead, it's a very valuable asset. And in particular, when it comes to Italian companies that should invest in competitiveness, lag a bit behind. According to some recent data, 68.9% of Italian companies have trained their employees. But those above 250 employees have trained them for 95% versus 66% of those with less than 50 employees. Well, the EU average is close to that, but we have 77.2% in Germany and 55% in France. And when it comes to lifelong learning, well, this is made for 55% of employees with an average cost of 830 euros per employee, with 257 euros of direct cost and 62 euros for, employee leave-related costs. So maybe it's not that much. And then there is another thing to be considered, another factor. Well, I was talking about this with Giancarlo, Giorgetti, and human capital as a word seems to have something off. But actually, the definition has changed over the last few years, because in the past that sounded as a contradictory term. But actually, this should not be any longer about human capital as if it was a sort of a purely concept-based term. But first with the term cognitive skills, and then with the soft skill term used by the OECD, and character skills that was mentioned in the latest Ekman book. We have specific personal skills: being open up to reality, ability to work in team, emotional stability, motivation, sense of responsibility, locus of control, the fact that people are aware of their responsibility. So you firstly understand that companies should favor the growth and development of such skills. But, so to sum up, what can we do in order to make even SMEs invest in such a thing? And I think that we have a major structural problem, that is the GDP growth. Because, well, let's think about the Olympic Games. 20, 30 years ago, we had sports like athletics, swimming, volleyball, where we had no champions. But thanks to long-term investments, we have become world champions. So we need to consider long-term investments. We know that short-term investments are important, especially when you consider the next year budget. But we should also consider long-term investments in order to overcome the big structural problems that we had over the last decades, and that prevented the GDP from growing as we wish. So I have the first question for Stefano Barrese. Is the head of such an important bank that maybe it won't say something interesting, but banks may sound as indifferent to such topics. But what do you think about this? What are you doing when it comes to this kind of topics and this kind of approach? So thank you, Giorgio, and good morning, everybody. Certainly, the topic that you raised is absolutely relevant, and it is strictly connected with growth. I mean, growth is about people, human capital, and so we are talking about education and training and lifelong learning. And this is something that is strictly intertwined also with innovation. But first of all, I would like to say a few words about the reality we live in. So let's have a look at the educational level. So employees between 25 and 64 years of age, and this data go back to 2023, so have the junior high school diploma for 25% of the cases. So when it comes to a degree, and we know we have 20% of employees being graduated, but certainly if we consider the European average, we lag behind because we are 14% lower. So again, we need to have a look in particular at France and Germany. So let's consider this. The current labor force that has the merit also to support and sustain the growth that now in Italy is slightly better than in other European countries needs to be updated. So this is a key and crucial topic that is pretty well known by anybody working today. But it's very hard to simply bring this about if you have many employees with just a junior high school diploma. That is why we should consider that investments in education can be depreciated, so they can be somehow recovered, as well as the 5.0 investments that are also acknowledged by the state in terms of tax credit. But we should do more in terms of education and investments. And also when it comes to innovation, let's think about what happened with the 4.0 companies in order to try to understand beforehand what could be done at level of 5.0. Over the last 8 years, the country has grown a lot on an average, more than others, but thanks to meaningful investments. For instance, from 2016 onwards, we invested 10 times what Germany invested. In the previous 8 years, we had divested for 22%. That explains why we had a better resiliency, both during the pandemic and during the energy crisis and the war. But if we consider technological transitions, we need skills. So that is why it is important to act immediately on the workforce. And the governor said something on this respect. Over the next 40 years, the workforce will go down, and probably we will live longer, hopefully. From 8 to 10 years more, we should reach 90 years of age for both genders. And so we're going to have 7 million people less when it comes to the workforce available. So we need to improve the quality, the educational quality of this workforce, and also improve the access of the workforce. And so we should consider another thing, and we have a huge gap in that respect. That has to do with women's participation in the labor market. We have a lower level of women's participation to the labor market considering the European average. So certainly we lag behind in this respect. And this gap is even bigger if we consider the women having a degree. So again, the high-level education seems to be the key to get a job and can lead then to revenue generation. And revenue generation means GDP. So capital investments are a form of growth. So this is exactly what we need in order to let this country be able to face positively the future. And then I have a last piece of information about education. So it goes without clear that even banks can do something about that. And education is a very important sector. If we compare the EU average, we have a major graduated students gap. More or less, we have a 14 percentage rate of difference in terms of EU average. So if we consider that the level of education of the parents seems to be a sort of sign of the level of education that will be reached by the child of that family. So when usually the level of education of the parents is low, so school dropout reaches 70%. So, but it goes down to 2% when the parents are educated. That is why we should try to push people, try to have a high level of education, what we call a tertiary level education. But then you have also the ETS system, and maybe this is something that has not been fully implemented yet. And with this, we have a huge structural gap, for instance, considering Germany. Well, I'm very proud of something that the bank I work for did, and this is something I'd like to share with you. We gave the opportunity to somehow prize the best and smartest youth, because we have set up a granting program so that a young person who can't afford to attend university is taken in charge by the bank. And so we somehow offer this, and this young person can be fully supported, can invest in themselves, can then find a job, so can have access to a number of positive things, and also can remain in this country. And this is another key element, because 80,000 graduate students left the country over the last few years. And of course, this is the blame is not to put on anybody in particular, but the average salary for graduate students is 30 to 40% lower than what a young graduate gets in other EU countries. So we have 30,000 students who have decided to remain and try to counterbalance that other huge number. But then you also need to consider, so working women, that is another key element. So women should be not just educated and get a degree, but then they need to be free to flexibly organize themselves in their working times, because we really want to keep them working and not to lose those 5 million working women along the way. And so this is also the key to make families and households grow. So key sorts of changes are needed, just a short working week. Well, this is something that should be extended beyond the services sector. And also, we should guarantee more flexibility so that people can also work on a smart work basis. So all these things should become a rule, but in particular, we should try to combine these strategies also with some sector like the manufacturing sectors. And then we have come up with the Women at Work loan that supports a woman during the first years of her child, 5,000 euros per month for at least 6 years, that can be repaid in 30 to 40 years in order to allow a woman who wants to work, so wants to fill the occupational gap, to be able to face expenses of all sorts. Of course, we can also consider the defiscalization of such a charge. And so the bank should be seen as a lever generating value, so offering help and support for socially oriented interventions. And then the 5.0 company topic. We heard what it was done for the 4.0 and the great achievements. The 5.0 just started. It's slightly more complicated because an energy certification is required. So rules are a bit more complex. We have put in place a specific structured procedure. But the main concern is for SMEs, as Mr. Vittadini said. Everything is harder and more complicated for SMEs because you need to find the right people. So our expectation is about maybe sort of having longer timing when it comes to the implementation of 5.0, because there may be a bottleneck effect, not only so demand-wise, but also when it comes to the production of some specific assets and goods. And in my opinion, there is a formula that we use that combines several things: generations, gender, cultures, and innovation. And this is nothing but education, so training and learning. So all that we have said so far is more than welcome. Right, so I'm glad to hear that even a bank, which is a pretty large company, has understood the importance of such topics. So now the idea is to see how we can intervene. So what can we do? So I give the floor to Maurizio Lupi in order to trigger the debate among our reputable guests. So first of all, good morning on my side, and also on behalf of the Subsidiarity Intergroup. And in particular, I would like to welcome those who undersigned the manifesto that was published yesterday by the Corriere della Sera. I wanted to thank the meeting di Rimini once again because, the presence of the Intergroup is almost a tradition now. And here in particular, we've always been welcomed and we really feel at home. So thank you very much indeed. And I remember when some years ago Giorgetti came for the first time and had a very thought-provoking speech. So this is a topic that we have been dealing with for quite some time. And Vittadini and Barrese already touched upon a meaningful number of topics. And I would like, first of all, to somehow underscore one fact and one aspect. Usually, we expect the state to have just one task, so distributing money, as if resource distribution could fix anything. But actually, we can't fix everything like that. That is why, even after so many years, we are still there working together, is because we all share the idea that it is important to have union that is based not necessarily on the same values, but that should assess a complete vision, sharing a direction. And the topic we are discussing today is a pillar, is a very sort of up-to-date one, because this is something that can let us guide the country and lead it towards a new era. So we need to put people back at the center. So it's about education and training. So this should be the first pillar on which we should start rebuilding our home. And it is not a case if we have two conferences on this, or a first conference, this one, about the specific sort of educational sector importance. So I want to make a couple of examples. And it's not just an economic issue. The first challenge is a cultural challenge, because laws provide specific answers, but also show a direction, provide a model. The 4.0 company value is an initiative that, beyond the merit of creating investments in companies, and also, first and foremost, also cultural value. So the message was, if you are not going to invest in technological innovation, we are really going to die in the long run, and then you will generate huge manage. I remember that during the first times of the intergroup work, and I remember that being said also on the manifesto that was also printed. And I remember that maybe Giancarlo was the president of the Budget Commission. We fought for a specific piece of legislation, the 5 per 1,000. It was a very small law, and the minister in charge for that was Giulio Tremonti. And so the constitution has just been changed. The subsidiarity principle has been integrated into that. So again, this is as if a piece, sort of a part of the money, a part of their revenues could be given to a specific entity, simply because the citizens may consider that the recipient institution as precious and valuable. But today, I think that we should try to do the same thing, and we have changed the world with that. So why I am telling you all this? Why would we like have a specifically perspective-oriented work? Well, we met the majority and the opposition a lot over the last few years, Minister Bernini and many more, and we questioned the universities, and the foundation also gave its support. But when it comes to ecological transition, digital transition, we were talking about artificial intelligence. And at the meeting, there was a specific conference on that with Father Benanti. And at the G7, Pope Francis also talked about this. Intelligence is never artificial. So intelligence belongs to people, to men and women. So AI is a tool that can be used for the common good and for individuals. But if we forget that, we will be overwhelmed and dominated by what we are building today. So it goes without saying that the innovation and technological transition challenge is going back from the AI to the I. So from lifelong learning and so on, much remains to be done. So we are working on something now. It's a huge challenge, but I know that changing budget laws is very difficult because you have the national budget and so many other budget levels. But why is education seen as a cost and never as a resource? Why can't we start even culturally and in a cross-cutting way win this kind of challenge? Why can't we somehow consider investments in education in PA and SMEs as valuable? So the more you train, the less you pay. This could be a slogan. The more you invest in lifelong learning of your employees, the more this will guarantee and build everybody's future. And there is a last element, because this is not just about training, and let's not think just about large companies, but of course, if a company invests in training, that person needs to be somehow detached from production cycle. And in 2001, there was a piece of legislation that gave companies the opportunity to have all the costs covered for the maternity replacement, so for a specific point-in-time intervention. So we should work on this. The more you train, the less you pay. Let's rethink this kind of budgetary approach in order to enhance such attitudes, because this will show us a way. So this is what we are trying to exchange about, and of course, I now give the floor to Mrs. Bonetti.
Grazie, intanto anche da parte mia un buongiorno e un grazie, sono onorata di poter essere di nuovo qui al meeting e di poterlo fare in un dibattito che ritengo essere davvero al cuore delle sfide strategiche che il nostro Paese sta affrontando e deve assumersi il coraggio e la responsabilità di affrontare davvero fino in fondo. Il titolo di questo intervento, di questa tavola rotonda, credo colga il punto chiave, e dentro a questo titolo c'è la parola persona. Io confesso che per mia estrazione culturale, quando sento parlare di capitale umano, insomma, un po' di fastidio, diciamo, lo provo, perché ritengo estremamente più efficace parlare del valore della persona. Ecco, però noi sappiamo bene, questa platea lo sa meglio di me, quando parliamo di persona noi parliamo non semplicemente dell'individuo, e questo io credo che lo dobbiamo cogliere soprattutto da un punto di vista dei politici, perché una persona è tale nella complessità del contesto relazionale che la definisce, che essa stessa definisce da protagonista, ma anche nel divenire temporale della storia di ciascuno di noi. E questo è uno, diciamoci chiaramente, dei grandi problemi che ha la politica oggi, perché invece spesso, per varie ragioni, il ministro Giorgetti lo sa bene, noi dobbiamo lavorare per leggi, competenze di bilancio e in qualche modo agiamo a silos e quindi definiamo azioni anche nell'ambito della formazione più per categorie.
We work in actions, and so, for example, we normally identify categories. We talk about employees or women or men. We do not refer to the fact that the people we are referring to are indeed people, individuals characterized by their past, their future prospects, and their relations. That's one of the biggest issues we have, because also during tests, training activities, there are some tests of this. There is a recent study by CISL according to which women participate in corporate training, which is much lower than their male counterparts. And that's one of the reasons why, when it comes to certification, gender-related certification, a specific measure was introduced with reference to this, to counter this aspect. To do this, we need to be more far-reaching in our political actions, and we have to activate training and education processes that are more cross-cutting across the traditional ones. In our country, we need to invest in training to increase the productive capacity of our country, and this for two main reasons. The first is that the challenges we are facing are revolutionary. They are very much different compared to the ones in the past. So individuals have to grasp the full sense and meaning of the changes they are living through, and we, in order to make them protagonists, we have to give them the chance to understand the extent of these changes and to be able to act within these challenges. So when we talk about digital transformations, when we think of the production fabric of our country, mainly made up of SMEs, providing qualified services as well as high-quality manufacturing activities. Let's also think about the issues related to the food and agricultural sector. In these sectors, talking about digital and technological transformation and working on skills that are more in other areas means that we need to set up a bridge capable of, in a way, having all sectors of our manufacturing sectors with the necessary skills. And we have to come to terms with the fact that in school, competencies are very, very poorly given. Second issue, we live in a country in which people are getting older. So against this background, either we give our workforce more qualifications, or if this fails, any demographic policy will be ineffective. Because even if we are successful, even if we register a boom in our birth rate next year, we will have only medium to long-term effects, and we cannot afford to wait so long. So we need to qualify our workforce today so that it becomes more qualified also in terms of the productivity of its GDP. Professor Billari says this very, very well. In his book, Domani e Oggi, he makes the example of South Korea. So faced with a very, very strong demographic decline, they boosted training, qualifying the skills of their workforce. So talking about the tangible assets and tools that we have available, I believe, as Professor Barrese said, that politics has to work as a lever, not only as a model, but rather as a process activator. This is what happened in Industry 4.0. This was the idea of the Family Act. That's the idea of the certification for gender equality, with incentives to companies for the de-taxation in the field of de-taxation and public procurement. In other words, a law in which we are triggering a process for future results. But this means that politicians have to stop thinking that a law has to be measured by the immediate consensus by our citizens. If we start thinking that the laws we make will be assessed on the occasion of the next legislature, I think we will make an incredible step forward. If we continue basically focusing only on the current political interest linked to the current legislature, we will run the risk of not making progress. And this brings about another important aspect, that of de-taxation. We have here President Osnato, and he will probably reproach me. And then we have Minister Giorgetti. I believe that if the Constitution is in our DNA, and if the Constitution states that taxes coincide with our ability to contribute to the collective good, and this is closely related to work. There's Article 4 of our Constitution that says that we are all called upon to contribute to the material and spiritual progress of our society. So when a company invests in training for its employees, that means that it is contributing in terms of a negative tax, because this is something that has to be recognized and acknowledged. We may then find what the best appropriate way to acknowledge this. Industry 4.0 did its way. The certification foresees an immediate discount. In other words, there are various ways, there are various tools, but the basic underlying idea has to be exactly this, because this, in a way, favors the idea of subsidiarity, for which there is already an alliance. The investment of everybody is part of a collective investment. If our country, as Panetta said, invests on both education and public debt, that means that we should pose ourselves a question. If it spends, when it comes to spending on debt, that means that we are paying what has already taken place. But if the key idea is that we have to spend more in investments to maintain the resilience and the growth that our country needs, well then, the main action in the field of investment is to favor education, because we're basically looking forward. Well, and we are activating the hope of a country that starts again believing in itself. And I think this is a challenge for which we need to be even more direct and effective. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Marco. Grazie. Buongiorno a tutti.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Giorgio Vittadini and to the Foundation for Subsidiarity for the opportunity given to me to speak. Thanks to Mr. Barrese, and also special thanks to my dear friend Maurizio Lupi, who is a marathon runner, according to what he says, but actually, as such, he is also a marathon runner for the Parliamentary Group for Subsidiarity. And that's indeed the group that produces more drafts and more opportunities for the common good. I would also like to thank the Rimini meeting. We are here today to talk about the value of the individual, and I think there is nothing more appropriate to be here at the meeting. And I'm saying this because this morning I've had the chance to walk on the fairground, and actually the stories narrated here truly stress the importance of the person. There's Margherita, a very enthusiastic young student who guided us through the exhibition on the Marna War and the wars in the Flanders and during the First World War. She told us that there was an episode of a ceasefire during the Christmas period, in which soldiers were not combating, and there was a mass celebrated on Christmas Day, and that was important because there was not an indication coming from but the truth was a deliberate choice by the people. It was the people who did the difference, who made the difference. And this is what this told us. It is people who did the difference. As Elena Bonetti said, it is people in their complexity, which is not only the individual, but rather the individual in his or her relations. So from people to families, to the community, to the nation, and therefore the responsibility vis-à-vis the others. And this responsibility has to produce results with reference to the context where you live. So, why is training so important for the development of the individual? If we asked Stefano Barrese what happened at Banca Intesa 50 years ago, well, probably a very good person studying, for example, economics at university, probably that person would join a bank, and for the following 20 to 25 years, that person would have probably needed anything else. But there was probably the law, the tools were known, the context was known. Maybe some parameters could change, but more or less the situation was quite stable. Today the situation is completely different. In 2 years the norms in a given context may change. In 2 years' time the world macroeconomic scenario can change, as well as the type of clientele and the computers and the operating systems enabling to run them. So the situation and the context are completely different. They have changed. So based on my experience of, I served as HR manager. Based on this experience of mine, we have the collaborator who is a resource, and this collaborator, of course, waits to have a higher wage in the company. One of the best ways to keep an employee with you is to, in a way, increase their wages. The OECD has recognized that there is a higher purchasing power in Italy. I also believe that today entrepreneurs themselves realize that thanks to their ability and the conditions to have been realized, that there are much better profits, and so they can start thinking that workers can receive, that employees can receive something more. So the pay is very, very important. And then there's an overall corporate well-being that needs to be created. Plus, I worked in a public company as an HR manager. And in this case, training and the promotion of the individual is one of the elements that contribute improving corporate performance as well as the performance of the individual. So I believe that these conditions needs indeed to be created. They need to be set. And this brings me to new norms, to the need for new norms, and to the foundations that need to be laid for these situations to be there. We need to establish a real relationship between the schools and educational institutions and the work of and the world of companies, the world of enterprises, that oftentimes find it difficult to have this interaction because there is still too much bureaucracy on this. And then there is definitely another issue. My colleague Marta Schifone worked on this. The idea is to favor, to promote women to, in a way, come closer to technical training in mathematics, chemistry, physics, and so on, which refers to works for which in the past women were thought not to be adequate. And today I have with me my dear friend Pietro in the workshop, in the carpenter workshop of his father in the past. It was more difficult maybe to work, but today there are very expensive machines and they need to have technical training and less physical activity. So this means that we need to work on this as well, but we also need to create something else, and here we need to create in other words, we need to promote the person in the context. Together with the labor committee, we are working on these aspects. This is fundamental. This is something that is foreseen by our constitution. There are 5 or 6 cross-cutting bills. Then there's a proposal by Chisle that is very complete. So when it comes to the fundamental choices of the companies, and when these choices involve workers, But then I believe that we are laying the foundations for which we can then ask for more. And we can induce employees better to educate themselves. And in my view, this is very much related also to the problem of the demographic winter, so to the aging population. Of course, we need to create the economic conditions, that's clear. And this has partly been done. Also, the government by Giorgia Meloni has done a lot in this compared to some decades ago. Yesterday, the Italian Statistical Office declared that the voucher for young mothers was requested by over 600,000 people. That means 80% of the possible beneficiaries. In other words, a very large number of people thought that the measure was very important. So economic conditions are fine, but we also need to have a an adequate cultural condition. If we do not go back to the idea that life is important, that the family is important, not only the religious family, but also that the family is important within a given community. If we don't come back to that, we will never solve a problem which Governor Panetta illustrated the other day. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We now have Giancarlo Giorgetti, the Minister for Budget and the Economy. Before that, he also served as Economic Development and the President of the Parliamentary Committee for the Budget. I think that your remarks will be very, very useful to continue working on our topics. So thank you very much. And also my provocations, because Giorgio, and then we have to be very, very careful. Whenever you come to the Rimini meeting, you have to be provocative. So I start with a provocation by contesting the title of the session. First of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation, and thanks for being here. It is Friday, and it is even lunchtime. So let us now contest the title. The first capital of the enterprise is the person. I would change it into the following title. The first capitalist of the enterprise is the entrepreneur. We talked a lot about the human factor, and we've always referred to the collaborator and the entrepreneur. But then we have also the entrepreneur, the businessman, as the first capitalist of the company. And he still is the person who kind of takes on the risk and nourishes the economy. This is something that should be understood by everybody. And I recently participated at the conference of the Italian Banking Association, ABI, and back then, not long ago, I said that banks should not be an algorithm. They are dealing with people. They're dealing with a person, with individuals who are made by a soul and the brain, specifically the entrepreneur. So if the bank is not capable of grasping a dimension that goes well beyond mere numbers, well, then it becomes difficult to support all the initiatives that then become the enterprise. Barrese knows this. And then there's another provocation that I launched privately on another topic. If you raise this issue to a politician, we know that politicians all work in the short run. So this is something that does not combine with what Maurizio Lupi said before. Work should not be seen as a cost, but rather as an investment in the long run. So if you have a short-sighted politics, and that can become a very big problem. And even if politics wishes to be farsighted, still there are rules which are maybe decided at a European level, like the ones on the Stability Pact, on the latest Stability Pact, in which the concept of investment is not adequately taken into account. So national countries, national states are forced to make decisions which are short-term or medium-term decisions. In this context, which is very difficult, there are still some truths that you all hinted to. First of all, the fact that the human factor, so the human resource, in its various forms, is the most important element that contributes to growth and productivity. This is the reality. And that's the reality that we see both with a microeconomic and with a macroeconomic approach. In my experience as former Minister for Economic Development, I understood one clear thing. I understood that the investment decision on the part of foreign investors in Italy, if you compare them with other realities, they did not depend on taxes. They partly depended on the judiciary. But the first thing that a foreign investor is the availability of human capital. That's the most important thing that they look for when a company decides to locate in Italy and to invest in Italy. This is something which kind of disrupted the ideas I had and my priorities, the priorities of a politician when that politician has to attract investments to Italy. Then there's a second consideration, which is at a macro level, macroeconomic level. On the one hand, there is a negative aspect, which is the brain drain or the kind of expert of lots of competencies, lots of skills who flee the country because they want to have a better career abroad or because their work is not paid well. And that's very sadly so. And then there's the other side of the coin. That is that our country, which is poor in many other things and which is very rich in intelligence. And this is the resource that we need to use to build for our future vision. Starting from this, what can we tangibly do? Vis-a-vis the idea that the traditional ideas that we studied at my times. Back then, we were told that productivity could be reached by reducing the number of employees and improving the use of machines. That was the very basic idea that everybody started from. So if you automate the use of machines, then you can be productive. But now it's quite difficult, and we have recently understood that human resources, if they're adequately used, they can make the difference. Although there is another point to refer to, a reference was made to artificial intelligence. We initially thought that intelligence makes reference to an individual, but in this case, intelligence is referring to a technology, something that is not a machine but carries out the works of a machine. So there is a new frontier of challenge within the company. But back to what Maurizio was saying, how can we consider our cost not as something that is only statistical, but which should be strategically thought in the long term? To do that, we need to think about the tools we're using. Elena knows it really well because she dealt with that as well. In the NRRP, there's lots of billions devoted, set aside for the upskilling and the reskilling, the gold project, the national competence plan. There's many of them. There's lots of titles and lots of, in a way, names of projects and plans that remind us of past 5-year plans. The issue here is to understand whether training and education, so the increase in competencies and skills, can be in a way pushed and in a way guided by the state, or rather guided by enterprises. This is a very basic choice we need to do. So from this point of view, what is it that is more efficient? Is it better to have a training that is in a way customized by companies rather than the kind of training envisaged by politicians? In that dimension, the risk is that we spend more compared to our objective. We had speakers refer to Industry 4.0 and 5.0. Many entrepreneurs complain about the complexity of Industry 5.0. It is so complex because we found it very, very hard to find formulas enabling them to expand the topics of training to Industry 5.0, because the limitations set by Brussels would, in a way, focus only on energy transition. That's also another topic, another issue. Then, tax credits. They are indeed efficient, but they comply with another type of criterion rather than the top-down approach I was mentioning before. That's basically, you mentioned the 5-year plan before, the 5-year plan of the Soviet Union. Now it's 7 years. Maybe a super bonus, a super voucher like the ones of the real estate sector. There's another dimension I'd like to refer to, which concerns the public administration. What we've said so far always refers to companies, to the size of companies in the private world. But it is not only that. If I think of how much we can and should do to improve the efficiency and the productivity of public administration, thanks to policies that indeed qualify public workers, so civil servants. These have always been seen as implementers, so to say. But indeed, we need, especially there, we need to have, in a dimension that basically does not comply with market dynamics. So we really need to bring continuous training, lifelong training in the public sector to help the productivity of public administration, to balance the system. Allow me to close by saying one thing. I see there my deputy secretary, but the women participation rate has really boomed over the last 2 years, and that is something we are very proud of. At the end of the day, however, the Vittadini, you say that actually learning is something that should be done by everybody. Everybody should learn. Actually, fact is that me and you, we find it much, much harder to learn than a 15-year-old. So this interconnection with the topic of the aging population is an issue which becomes more and more relevant if we are to envisage the future of our country. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Giorgio. I would like to conclude the meeting by saying that this is an area, that of the meeting, where we invest in children. This answers to your first question. If we help children be born, then we have more young people, and so we start with a fundamental aspect. If we have, having children be born is a matter of ideals. If you have no ideals, you have no children, and you don't even have companies. You don't have enterprises. Second aspect, a second fundamental aspect is that this is the 45th meeting, and I see sitting in the first line the ones who founded it, like Murro. I think that we have never stopped saying, as Father Giussani said, that the first issue is education. When we used to say this here, or for example within Compagnia delle Opere, within the Foundation for Subsidiarity, nobody listened to us because the problem of companies was another one. So the selfishness of individuals through the invisible hand brings to the collective good. And actually this is not true. We kept on saying that there was something else. The first capitalist is the entrepreneur. But when we said that, nobody would listen to us. In 2007, a famous columnist of Corriere della Sera said that Italy's problem is that we had very few derivatives. So after 45 years, we say that the problem is an education that can train and educate better. First of all, we need to have quality school and quality university. I don't know if quality means just actually increasing the number of digital universities. Quality means increasing quality. And then also the fact that, as I've often been abroad, and then I go often to New York, the Columbia University and New York University, they all the students leave the university and then they get filled with people who study and learn from 5 p.m. up until night. My university, Università Bicocca, actually closes by law at 8 p.m. And if you are there until 8:30 p.m., you're kicked off of the university. So why shouldn't our managers and entrepreneurs do the same thing that is done in New York, for example? This is what we're talking about. We're talking about continuous education. Maybe it is less productive, but it is fundamental because you constantly have to train yourself up until you're old. And also you and I, especially myself because I'm older, I really look forward to continue learning because that's human, and this is what we are talking about. A third aspect, I think that there are some issues that shouldn't be divisive. There are issues that pertain the majority and the opposition, and others that are fundamental. So they should, in a way, be voted by Parliament. We cannot but agree on the fact that we need to, in a way, go beyond the fact that we have 18% of graduates or very low percentages in other educational areas. So this should be the work of all political parties. You have actually to focus on that and say what has been done, not in a top-down manner, but as an incentive to those who do something. The idea is that in California, big companies were born private, but then the public invested in them by distinguishing, because actually you need to make the difference. If you have nothing, you have to deprive them with resources. You do not do lots of progress if you give very few resources to everybody. You have to praise and reward the ones who have value. I'd like to remind you that the resources received with Dona Ora, with the donation to the meeting, will partly be given and devoted to Gaza, to the Gaza Strip. Thank you very much.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Con Easy Bank, la banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo.
Qui è ora. Qui è dove conoscere significa confrontarsi con le sfide della contemporaneità, ascoltare le nuove generazioni da accogliere nel tempo presente. Ora, Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. Visita il sito unicat.it.
ma è una risorsa da valorizzare. Riciclare, riciclare, riciclare è l'attività principale per decarbonizzare. Riciclare, riciclare, riciclare. Montello esempio di economia circolare.
Si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Con EasyBank, la banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo.
Qui è ora. Qui è dove conoscere significa confrontarsi con le sfide della contemporaneità, ascoltare le nuove generazioni da accogliere nel tempo presente. Ora, Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. Visita il sito unicat.it.
una risorsa da valorizzare. Riciclare, riciclare, riciclare è l'attività principale per decarbonizzare. Riciclare, riciclare, riciclare. Montello esempio di economia circolare.
Si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia?